If you've ever watched someone get exactly what they wanted without ever worrying about how it affected everyone else, you already know this isn't really about being a bad person. It's what psychology calls low reciprocity concern, and it works more often than it probably should.
Point 1. They ask for what they want without hedging. No, sorry, this might be a weird ask. No over-explaining. Just the request, stated plainly. This comes down to assertive communication. Removing hedges and qualifiers makes a request easier to process and harder to refuse on the spot, simply because there's no ambiguity to push back against. Most people soften requests to protect the other person's feelings. That softening is exactly what makes a request easy to say no to. It's not that they're better negotiators, it's that they've removed the part everyone else leaves in.
Point 2. They don't pay the invisible tax of managing everyone else's feelings first. Before most people make a decision, they run it through, how will this affect them? Selfish people mostly skip that step. This is what's sometimes called emotional labor asymmetry, the unpaid, invisible work of anticipating and managing other people's emotional reactions before you even act. Skipping that step doesn't just save time. It removes an entire layer of hesitation that slows everyone else down. They're not making better decisions. They're making decisions faster because they never priced in a cost most people pay automatically.
Point 3. They set boundaries without guilt, without the apology tour that usually follows. Most people's boundaries get eroded because guilt punishes them the moment they set one, an instinct closer to what's sometimes called the fawn response, where discomfort gets resolved by giving in rather than holding the line. Selfish people mostly don't run that program. The boundary doesn't cost them anything internally, so it doesn't get negotiated away. It's not that their boundaries are stronger, it's that nothing inside them is arguing to take them back down.
Point 4. People mistake their confidence for correctness. Say something with total certainty, and people are far more likely to believe it, regardless of whether it's actually true. This is a well-documented bias, sometimes called the confidence heuristic. Humans use certainty as a shortcut for competence, especially under time pressure or in group settings, because verifying is slower than just trusting the tone. Selfish people tend to speak with unearned certainty more often, simply because they're not spending bandwidth worrying about being wrong. It's a shortcut everyone else falls for constantly, mistaking how sure someone sounds for how right they actually are.
Point 5. They rarely absorb blame that isn't theirs. Something goes wrong, and somehow it's never quite their fault. Not because they're lucky, but because they simply don't offer to carry it. This one has real teeth, because it usually comes at someone else's expense. The responsibility has to land somewhere, and it tends to land on whoever's willing to hold it. Selfish people aren't better at avoiding mistakes. They're just far less willing to volunteer for the ones that aren't strictly theirs. That's the part that stings the most if you're the person who's always absorbed it instead.
Point 6. Here's the part that actually matters. This winning is narrow, and it's short-term. All of this adds up to something that looks like winning. Faster decisions, fewer boundaries pushed on, less absorbed blame. But look closer at what it costs. Research on manipulative and self-interested personality traits consistently shows the same pattern. Short-term gains in negotiations or first impressions paired with long-term erosion of trust, cooperation, and relationships once people catch on. The wins are real. They're just small, and they don't compound the way trust and reciprocity do. So if you've spent years being the person who considers everyone else first, you're not losing the long game. You're just playing a different one, and it's the one that actually pays off later. Every one of these comes from the same place, removing the internal costs that most people pay automatically in exchange for wins that don't tend to last. That's not a personality flaw to envy. It's a short-term trade most people would regret making. If any of this sounded familiar, you're probably the person who's been quietly paying those costs for years. That's not weakness. That's the exact thing that makes people actually trust you.
And that's worth more than anything this list just described.